It's why most officers tell me they would never arrest somebody based on facial recognition alone. But I think sometimes you run into automation bias where you're like, well, this system went through millions or billions of photos and it told me this is the right guy. And then any other evidence that seems incriminating, like they have friends from New Orleans, becomes confirmatory for you that it's the right person.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air.
I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to Change Agents, an IRONCLAD original presented by Montana Knife Company. Today's episode is about Clearview AI, which is a tech startup that has a database of more than 30 billion images. That's right, you read that number correctly. That links individual faces with names and identities and is selling access to this technology to law enforcement. My guest today is Kashmir Hill, a technology reporter for the New York Times. In addition to the New York Times, her work has appeared in publications including Forbes, Popular Science, and Gizmodo. She has a new book specifically about Clearview AI. It's called Your Face Belongs to Us, a secretive startup's quest to end privacy as we know it. A little bit of info on Clearview AI before we dig in. Like I mentioned, 30 plus billion images that have been taken and scraped from social media sites on the internet, all open source. Its primary function is facial recognition, matching images of people's faces with their names and identity. Clearview AI has been sued by the ACLU for violating privacy laws and has actually been banned in several countries. Let's dive in. I don't think the topic could actually be more important, and I'm curious your just anecdotal take. What percentage of people do you think understand when it comes to their digital footprint and the amount of, beyond Clearview AI, just the amount of information about them that is out there that is gathered and sorted and parsed and sold to whether it's advertisers? I mean, it's 10 years ago, actually, wow, even more than that. In 2003, we were already tracking people with their electronic usage overseas at a very rudimentary level. They weren't using social media, but even just electronic devices connecting with each other. We could put together patterns of life, social circles, family trees, all of those things. I don't think that they were very aware of it at the time. I would say we are generations, leaps and bounds forward from that technology we were using back then. But how many people do you think have any understanding of how much digital information is out there about them?
I think people have a general sense of being tracked. I don't think a lot of people fully understand how many different entities are gathering data about them, how they're doing it, how it's going to impact them. That I don't think they understand. And I do think that most people are convinced that their smartphone is listening to them, which I don't think is true unless you are, targeted by a state actor. But yeah, I think people generally have this sense now of paranoia and this kind of knowledge of, yeah, I'm being tracked. Is my phone listening to me? Is somebody tracking my location? Is my, smart vacuum sucking up more than just the dirt in my house? Yeah, I think people are aware, but it's hard to know the specifics.
I think the harder question actually is, even if they were aware, would they change their behavior, or are we so ingrained into the society that we live in now with the integration of electronics? Would they be willing to take a step backwards to recover some level of privacy? Or are they just like, you know what, it is what it is. I'm not a bad actor, so who cares?
I see people taking that step backwards. One of the things I've really noticed over the last decade is that people have changed their social media profiles to be private. Oh, yeah. It used to be, as a journalist, when I was researching somebody, it was pretty easy to see everything they had put online. But I think people have become aware, somebody might come looking that I don't want looking. And so, we do have influencers who are super public and, anybody can watch their TikTok, but I do see more people making those kind of decisions, not putting photos of their children online, not just kind of uploading the contents of their smartphone photos to Flickr for the whole world to see. I do think people are choosing to be more private. But it's hard to predict how the information you put out there right now might come back to kind of haunt you as the technology gets more powerful. So that's what makes it hard to protect your privacy. When is a company going to come along, for example, like Clearview AI that, collects all of the photos from the public internet and reorganizes the internet by face? I don't think most people putting their photos online over the last 20 years realized something like that was going to happen.
Today's episode of Change Agents is brought to you by Onyx Off-Road. Now, some of you may have heard the term Onyx before in regards to hunting. Same company, different app, different utilization. This is specifically Onyx Off-Road. And if you like getting off the beaten path, if you like exploring where others may not like to go, then you are going to love Onyx Off-Road. It's the ultimate GPS navigation app for adventurers. When I turn this thing on, where I live up here in Kalispell, it lights up with available trail options that, quite frankly, I never would be able to, probably because I don't have the time to find and explore on my own. So with Onyx Off-Road, you can find open trails that are near you, even without cell service. And unlike Google, Onyx has real humans mapping the trails, providing detailed information on trail difficulty, descriptions, pictures, and more. So whether you're looking for rock crawling areas or checking if your trailer could make it to a dispersed camping location, Onyx Off-Road has you covered. Plus, you can explore both public lands and private properties confidentially, meaning you can look at them through the app. You can start your adventure with a 7-day free trial and experience the difference yourself. Download Onyx Off-Road today and elevate your off-roading experience. Can you unpack what Clearview AI is and then talk about how it first hit your radar?
Yeah, so Clearview AI is a New York-based startup that built a facial recognition app where you take a photo of somebody and it will return to you all the places on the internet where their face has appeared. So it's a way of finding their social media profiles, finding out, their name, their address, maybe even finding photos of them that they didn't know existed online. And Clearview AI has been primarily selling this app to police so that police can identify unknown criminal suspects or even victims of crime. I first heard about the company in the fall of 2019, and it was in a public records request about facial recognition technologies that police had access to, and got this PDF from the Atlanta Police Department, and it had some advertising materials about Clearview AI, describing it as a Google for faces. It told the police, stop searching, start solving. And there was a legal memo in there from Paul Clement, who, I have this background in legal reporting, absolutely knew who Paul Clement was. Very prominent attorney now in private practice, used to be Solicitor General of the United States under Bush. And he had written this memo on behalf of Clearview AI to give to police to reassure them that if they wanted to try the app, they wouldn't be breaking state and federal privacy laws by doing so. And it was really fascinating memo. And at the time, most of us, the general understanding of facial recognition is that it didn't work that well, that it was really flawed, that police had, kind of abandoned it a little bit, like it just wasn't reliable enough to be used. And here, this memo says that hundreds of police departments are using it, that it works incredibly well. It has something like 99% accuracy. And so when I heard about it, I thought, one, is this true? And two, who is Clearview AI and why have I never heard of them before? And how did they do this before like a Google or a Facebook? So I was really intrigued.
So who is behind Clearview AI? And I'm curious, what was their original business model? Was this always targeted at law enforcement?
Yeah, it was not always targeted at law enforcement. The kind of duo that started Clearview AI, it was a guy named Richard Schwartz who worked with Rudy Giuliani. He was kind of a political media guy, a little older, and he teamed up with a younger guy named Juan Ton Tat, who was kind of a genius coder, loved computers, had made a lot of Facebook quizzes and iPhone games in an app called Trump Hair that would put, former president's hair on the heads of people in your photos. And he had discovered that the technology around facial recognition had come really far. And he thought, wow, we could create some kind of app where you take a photo of somebody and do a background check, find out information about them. And he started building this app and it was working. And the two of them thought, okay, how do we make money off of this? And at first they were thinking, oh, we can sell it to hotels. We can sell it to, airports. We can sell it to grocery stores to try to identify shoplifters. They didn't even think of the police as a possible customer for quite a while after they kind of had created the app.
Have you ever been able to determine the first use case by law enforcement when they first stumbled across it?
So I don't know if I know the very, very first one. The first time the Department of Homeland Security tried the app, I talked to the officer. He was investigating crimes against children, and he had this image of exploitation of a child. The person, there was a photo of a man in bed with a small girl. He was looking directly into the camera. And so he asked other agents that worked on child crimes, hey, have you ever seen this guy before? Do we know who this perpetrator is? And one of the people he sent it to had access to Clearview AI. And so she sent him the Clearview results. And it led him to this Instagram photo. And it was of a kind of bodybuilder standing with a woman. He said, oh, this isn't my guy. And the officer said, look in the background. And that was the match. It was this guy standing behind a counter for a workout supplement company. And it was him. It was clearly him. His face was super tiny in the background of this photo. And the officer ends up, kind of following the digital crumbs to figure out who this guy was. And they went and arrested him in Las Vegas and, got this child out of his reach. And his boss at DHS said, oh my gosh, we need to get a subscription to Clearview AI. That's incredible.
Yeah, I feel like it spread like wildfire going downhill or uphill, depending, I guess, which way the wind is blowing after that.
Yeah, the NYPD was the first agency to get access to Clearview. And because the NYPD is an agency that so many other police kind of look to for their techniques, for their tools. So it really did, as you say, it spread like wildfire from the NYPD around the country, even around the world. And when people, law enforcement has this kind of, whisper network, various kind of affinity groups, and they would tell each other, you've got to try this app. It's really like nothing we've used before.
Are they upfront and open about using this type of technology? And I kind of feel like the cat is a little bit out of the bag based off, you have a book specifically about this type of technology in Clearview. So it would be hard for them to be super quiet about it. But until that point, were they being quiet about the techniques they were using?
So at the point I discovered Clearview AI in the fall of 2019, the police had already been using Clearview for about a year, and nobody knew about it. The public didn't know about it. And, when I first approached Clearview AI, they ignored me. They didn't want to talk to me. They kind of actively avoided me. I reached out to some agencies. I had to kind of figure out who was using it, which I did through Google dorking, where I just searched Clearview AI on .gov websites and started seeing it pop up on budgets. And so I reached out to various agencies to ask them about it. And a lot of them did not respond. And that is something I often encounter as a reporter. The police don't always want to talk about the technologies or surveillance tools they're using because they don't want to give the bad guys, a heads up about how to avoid them. But there were some officers that responded to me and were willing to talk about it. And that is how I did my first story on Clearview AI in January 2020 and said, hey, this technology exists and there are hundreds, actually thousands of police departments using it. And that was when the world found out that Clearview AI existed. But no, they were in operation for a year before kind of the general public knew anything about them.
I feel like most people's response to hearing about something like this is an immediate, likely revulsion due to an an encroachment on their privacy. But I also feel like somewhere in the fine print that none of us spend any time reading on these social media sites, we click on something that says whatever we upload becomes either public domain or the property of the hosting service that we are hosting to. And I think I can understand why the hosting services or these social platforms don't create this tool themselves, because that probably would be a violation of policy. But by having a third party, essentially what they're doing is correct me if I'm wrong, scraping open source information and aggregating it. So the company can say, we're not the one doing it. And by the way, you have already, the privacy policy that you accepted allows for your images to be out there in the open on the internet. We can't control what this third party does. Is that kind of how this works?
Yeah, pretty much. Like some of the companies that Clearview AI had scraped, like Facebook, LinkedIn, Venmo, they were not happy about what Clearview had done. They said, hey, you have violated our terms of service. It says that you can't, scrape our sites. You can't use our members' photos this way. But Clearview AI just kind of ignored them and they didn't sue. And so, yeah, this continues to go on. And this is the story of AI generally right now. Generative AI, they just go out and they scrape everything that's on the internet and kind of consider it fair game because it's out there. So that's what's going on right now. And I think most people react to this. My initial reaction when I heard about them was to think, okay, what photos have been taken of me over the last 20, 30 years? And are they on the internet? And am I comfortable with everything that exists out there? And I think some people are like, well, what gives them the right to search my face? I feel like I should have more control over my personal information. At the same time, I think about if there was a crime committed against me and this technology allows them to identify that person, that's appealing to me. So it all depends on how the technology is being used. Is it being used against you, or is it being used to protect you in some way? And that influences, I think, how people think about it.
It's like walking on a razor blade, because the first example you gave, people who work in the ICAC world, the Internet Crimes Against Children, I can only imagine that for somebody who works in that world, their deepest desire is to actually have the people that they are targeting taken off the street, away from their victims. And I don't think anybody would argue for not having that happen. And at the same time, like you said, I would like to have some control over my existence on the internet. And I say that in part of my job, for lack of a better term, is existing on social media. So I'm saying in one hand that I want privacy, and on the other hand, I'm living a public life, which is a very diametrically opposed position. I can understand both, but that's a tenuous razor blade, because it just takes a little bit of a shift in one direction or the other. And you could easily step across privacy concerns. It could easily be used by a malicious actor or an overreaching government entity to deeply invade your privacy and collect information on you, and then potentially even lead to action taken against you based off information I'm not so sure that anybody has the right to, other than the individual themselves. Of course, they have the choice not to post anything, but like you're saying, I think of my own digital footprint. There's the things that I willingly choose to put up, and I have no control over any other people's photos that I might appear in and their decision to put those up. So good luck being an actual ghost on social media, where it's not going to at least get some churn of images for your face.
Yeah, one of the first officers I talked to about this, he's actually really careful not to put photos of himself on the internet, and kind of information in general, because he doesn't want that to be found by people who might not like him, because he helped lead to their prosecution. And so when he got access to Clearview AI, he searched his own face and discovered there was a photo of him that came up on the internet. It was on Twitter, and he had been on patrol at an event at a parade, and he was in the background of someone else's photo. And, he had his uniform on, he had his name tag on. It definitely would have led from his face to his name. And he thought, wow, this is so powerful a tool. This is going to be great for police to use. He said, but this is going to be horrible for undercover officers. It's going to make it impossible to protect your identity. And it also points out, even if you are a really private person, you say, okay, I'm not going to put any photos of myself on the internet. you alone are not responsible for your privacy. There's this concept called networked privacy, and it's like anyone else who takes a photo of your face and puts it on the internet, that is something you can't control. So I think it's impossible to be, perfectly private. So I think when we think about these things, we really need to think about what world do we want to live in? How do we want to protect people, given that this is the nature of how we live today? Like, we have digital selves. It's kind of impossible to not be on the internet in some way, whether it's your face or your voice or your name. Yeah. What do we want? What do we want that to look like? How findable should that information be? Who should be able to use it?
How close does what Clearview AI is doing, how close does it flirt to violating law? Or does it already and it's kind of just ignored?
Yeah, it depends on basically where you live. You have different rights over your face and lots of different information depending on where you live. So Clearview did violate the laws of some countries like Europe, Canada, Australia. All of the privacy regulators in those places took immediate notice of the existence of Clearview AI and started to investigate them and said, hey, you've broken our privacy laws. Our privacy laws say that you can't use people's sensitive information without their consent. And so they kicked Clearview out of those jurisdictions. They fined the company. They said, take our citizens' photos out of your database. Haven't had a lot of success with achieving that. But yeah, Clearview is not allowed to do business in those places. Here in the US, mostly we don't have any kind of privacy laws that protect us against that at the federal level. Then there's a few states that have biometric information privacy laws. So if you live in Illinois, for example, a company can't use your biometrics, your voice, your face, your fingerprints without your explicit consent. So that's one of the states where Clearview did get sued and got into some trouble. But there's exceptions for government use. So, if Clearview is only working with the government, that makes it okay to do that. And so that's something Clearview's agreed to do. They say, we're only going to sell this tool to police. We're only going to sell it to governments. We won't sell it to private businesses or to individuals.
I mean, fortunately, the government would never misuse a tool like this. So I have an immense amount of faith that they're always doing the right thing in the best interest of their citizens.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people like the idea of face recognition to solve crimes. But once governments have that power to identify you all the time, it can certainly get misused. And we've seen that in China. We've seen that in Russia, where face recognition is used to identify protesters. The police will show up at their door the next day and give them tickets for unlawful assembly. China uses it in all kinds of ways. I mean, you automatically get a jaywalking ticket in some cities there that have face recognition running on cameras. There's a public restroom in Beijing where somebody was stealing toilet paper. So they installed facial recognition cameras in the bathrooms. You have to look into the camera to get a certain amount of toilet paper. And if you need more, you have to wait and look again. So, I mean, once you get these kind of surveillance systems in place, there's so many different ways it can possibly be used. And I think some of those are more chilling than others.
Ladies and gentlemen, this episode of Change Agents is brought to you by Montana Knife Company. If you are a fan of the show, if you've tuned in before, you've probably heard me talking about them. They are an American-made brand. Actually, just down the road from where I'm at right now, about 120 miles away down in Frenchtown, is a man named Josh Smith, the founder of Montana Knives. And if you're a hunter, you've definitely heard about him. My favorite, my go-to, actually in my pack somewhere in this room, is the Mini Speed Goat. You're probably aware that they have a culinary line. They have a line that you could use for skinning, for fillet, and every use in the backcountry. But what you don't know is that on July 11th, they're going to have a tactical line. The first line, or the first knife in that line, is going to be called the War Goat. I wish I had one to show you, but that's how far into production they are right now. I don't even have one to hold up for you to see. When I do, you're definitely going to see it. And if it's anything like the other knives that Josh and Montana Knife Company make, you can be guaranteed it's going to serve every purpose that they claim it will. Go to montanaknifecompany.com to to check out what they have to offer. Good luck getting one of these things when they come available because, man, they go fast. So be prepared and be on the lookout. What's going on, everyone? This episode is also brought to you by Allegiance Gold. Gold prices have surged, reaching nearly $2,500, a 20% increase in under a year. With traditional investments under scrutiny, gold and other precious metals have become attractive alternatives. The rise in gold prices reflects growing skepticism towards conventional investments and highlights its stability. Notably, even banks are increasing their gold reserves, underlying its lasting value. Gold isn't just a short-term play, it's a long-term strategy for financial security and growth. Whether you're an experienced investor or just starting, gold should be a part of your investment portfolio. Start securing your financial future with Allegiance Gold, a trusted leader in precious metals with top ratings from TrustLink and an A+ accreditation from the Better Business Bureau. Allegiance Gold can help you protect your IRA or 401k with physical gold and silver, or delivers precious metals securely to your doorstep. If that sounds interesting to you and you go to protectwithandy.com today, listeners will get an exclusive lowest price on the market for select gold bars. That is protectwithandy.com, or you can call 844-790-9191 to talk to an account representative. I would imagine you talk with people who are rigid advocates for privacy. And I'm going to assume some of the things that you just listed, kind of what the Chinese government chooses to do with this. Are the concerns in the United States from those advocates for privacy, do they mirror the type of, obviously the cart is a little bit in front of the horse when it comes to the US on their utilization of this. And I'm sure they could roll everything into their social credit score, that whole ecosystem that could be based around this. What are people here in the US? What are their major concerns with this type of software?
There's certainly some people, some advocates like Evan Greer, for example, from Fight for the Future, who feel that facial recognition should be banned. And Evan always compares it to nuclear weapons, that the really? Possibilities. Yeah, he says that it's just there are too many ways it could go wrong, and that it just shouldn't exist in society. I don't find a lot of people that are that extreme in their reaction to it. But certainly there's many people that think, okay, well, I'm okay with police having access to this, but I don't want individuals to be able to do this, or businesses. And that has been one of the craziest use cases in the United States. Madison Square Garden, the big events venue, installed facial recognition technology in 2018 as a security measure, to keep like how Taylor Swift uses it to keep stalkers, out of concerts or keep tabs on them, to keep people out who have thrown a beer bottle, down onto the stadium floor. But Madison Square Garden decided to use it in another way to punish its enemies. And so they went and banned all lawyers who had lawsuits against MSG or any of its, many sister brother companies. And so it went to the websites of these law firms and scraped the photos of all the lawyers who worked there, thousands of lawyers from something like 90 different firms. And when those lawyers tried to go to a Knicks game or a Rangers game or a Mariah Carey concert or a Fish show, they'd be stopped at the door and told, you're not allowed in here until the suit against us is resolved. And so that was this kind of, people really reacted to that. They thought, wow, I could be discriminated against because of where I work, or I don't know, my political views, or because I've written a bad Yelp review of a place. It was kind of this look at what the world could really be like if, all of our faces if our faces became a portal to everything that's knowable about us from the internet, if kind of who you are lives there.
That's what I mean about it being like walking a razor blade. It could probably do an immense amount of good because it strips the anonymity of people, especially inside of a crowd. But that's the danger too. It strips the anonymity of people inside of a crowd that may have done nothing from a legal perspective, maybe Madison Square Garden did some stuff where they needed to be sued a little bit. And yes, I get it. You have the right to refuse service to anybody, but it shows if it has power to have that impact to law enforcement, you would have to be ignoring the reality that it has power for private entities as well to mold and shape and weaponize. And I'm just thinking, as you were telling me that story, I'm just trying to imagine what this operations center at Madison Square Garden must look like, because what you're talking about is very quick, real-time recognition of people, and you're catching them maybe at the gate or shortly after the gate. So it's obviously powerful, and it's obviously almost real-time. And they have a team of people dedicated to doing this. I'm not so sure how I feel about that for businesses that I want to spend my money and time at.
Yeah, I wanted to see it for myself. And so I bought 2 tickets to the Rangers and invited a lawyer who was on the ban list. She worked at a personal injury firm. She hadn't sued Madison Square Garden, but her colleagues were. And so, we stood in line right outside of Madison Square Garden. We start entering, it's a huge venue. There's thousands of people that are entering many different entrances of the building. We got inside, we put our bags down on the kind of, the conveyor belt to be screened. By the time we picked them up, a security guard walked over to us. He asked her for identification. They wanted to confirm that, the face was the right match. She showed her ID, and they said, he said, "You're going to have to wait here for my security manager to come over." And he came over and said, "I'm sorry, you're not welcome here." He gave her this little note and kicked her out. And it was so fast and at this scale of, thousands of people that were entering. So it really is, the technology can be very powerful. I think it's more accurate than most people realize.
Is Madison Square Garden, are they required to tell people that they are using that technology? And then I'm curious if you ever saw the cameras that were identifying the person that you were with, or were they just like the security cameras in the ceiling? So they're using the cameras that already exist, or is this something additional?
So Madison Square Garden is in New York City, and New York City has this really unique law that says if you're using biometrics like facial recognition, you need to have a sign at the entrance that tells people that. So yeah, there is a sign that, hey, your face is going to be, scanned for security purposes. When it comes to cameras, in New York City, on any given city block, you probably have like dozens of cameras that are looking at you. When I was outside Madison Square Garden, I was looking for cameras, and there were many, and I have no idea which one was the facial recognition camera, but clearly got a good look at our faces.
They must have an entire system there just dedicated to responses from that, in addition to their overall general security as well. That is a fascinating use case. And
yeah,
extrapolate that outward in so many different directions.
Yeah, and I've asked them, I wanted to know more about that. Which system are you using? How does this work? And they have not been super cooperative there. I don't know which facial recognition company they use. One thing that's interesting, and I think this is a good illustration of the fact that laws do work, is that, Madison Square Garden, MSG, also owns a property in Chicago. They have a theater there. I think it's called the Chicago Theater. And they can't use facial recognition to keep lawyers out there, even though the ban does apply, because of this Illinois state law that says to use people's biometrics, you need to have their consent. So if they wanted to ban lawyers at that venue, they would have to get permission from the lawyers to use their faces that way. We can pass laws that say companies aren't allowed to do this, that they do need to get our consent before they scan our faces. We just don't have those laws in most places in the United States.
Yeah. And I know that Clearview was, they were sued by the ACLU for violations of privacy laws. Can you discuss a little bit that lawsuit and what the outcome was?
Yeah, so that was a suit brought by the ACLU in Illinois saying, hey, you have violated this law. It's called BIPA. It's really interesting. I tell the history of the law in the book because it was passed in 2008. It's the very rare law that moved faster than the technology. Most of the companies weren't really using facial recognition at that point. But the ACLU said, yeah, Clearview, you violated this. You gathered a whole bunch of photos of people without their consent. And we think that, you're threatening free speech, that you violated the Fourth Amendment. This is unreasonable search, unreasonable seizure, given that you're working with government entities. They ended up settling that suit, and Clearview agreed that they would not sell their product to anybody but government or the police. And that was kind of the resolution of the suit.
What organization is responsible to safeguard and perhaps watchdog Clearview AI to make sure that that is the only people they're selling to?
That's a good question.
Are we on the honor system?
I guess
Clearview.
me, a journalist. Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any private companies that Clearview's working with. In their early days, they were. One of the big companies they're working with is Macy's. Macy's uses facial recognition to monitor shoplifters. And if you go to the Macy's in New York City, there are signs on the wall that say, "Hey, warning! Biometrics are being collected here." But yeah, I mean, in terms of who's enforcing it, yeah, I mean,
listen, we will only sell to the government, and we, as the government, we will watchdog this to make sure it's legit. Perfect system.
The one agency that Clearview works with a lot is NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And that's because NIST is this really interesting, unique federal laboratory. They test facial recognition algorithms. They've been doing it for more than 20 years now to see how accurate they are, which is kind of an important part of this whole process. Like, how well does the technology work? And so Clearview and many other companies will send their algorithms to NIST, and NIST tests it on different kinds of photos, mugshots, photos from kiosks at kind of travel centers, and they'll give them a score that says like how well the technology works. And so they at least are monitoring the accuracy. It is voluntary whether a company sends their algorithms to NIST, but I think it's something that government agencies like to know before they sign up a vendor. How well does this actually work?
How often does it make mistakes? Specifically Clearview. I'd have to imagine that this isn't the only organization working on this, but do you have any idea the accuracy model for Clearview AI?
Yeah, I mean, most of the good algorithms are, quite accurate under ideal conditions where you have a very clear photo of somebody. But they do make mistakes, and we don't have any kind of auditing system that tells us how often the police are misidentifying somebody or arresting the wrong person, or when a Madison Square Garden or Macy's is kicking the wrong person out of their stadium. And so it's pretty anecdotal. And I do know of a case where Clearview messed up, or Clearview wouldn't say they messed up. I think they would say the police messed up. They overly relied on the Clearview result. But it's a guy named Randall Caron Reed. He lived in Atlanta, was driving to his mom's house the day after Thanksgiving, gets pulled over by 4 police cars and arrested for larceny in Jefferson Parish. And he said, "Where's Jefferson Parish? I don't know where that is." And they said, "It's in Louisiana." And he said, "I've never been to Louisiana." And it turned out that there had been this kind of shoplifting incident in a couple of stores around New Orleans. And there was surveillance footage of the people who did it. And when they ran this face, it was a match to Randall Caron Reed. And the police looked him up on Facebook, saw he had a lot of friends that were in the New Orleans area, and decided based on that to issue this warrant for his arrest and request for extradition to Louisiana from Georgia. He ended up spending a week in jail before his lawyers were able to clear it up and send them more photos of him. And when the police looked at the other photos, they realized they had the wrong guy. But yeah, it does go wrong, and it's hard for people when it does. You get arrested, you have to hire a lawyer. It's why most officers tell me they would never arrest somebody based on facial recognition alone. But I think sometimes you run into automation bias where you're like, well, this system went through millions or billions of photos and it told me this is the right guy. And then any other evidence that seems incriminating, like they have friends from New Orleans, becomes confirmatory for you that it's the right person.
Yeah, that's problematic for a variety of reasons. I mean, how about the concept of innocence until proven guilty? Perhaps my face looks similar to somebody's face elsewhere, but how about having a preponderance of evidence before throwing somebody in jail for a week. I mean,
Yeah.
how did they locate him in Atlanta? Do you happen to know? Was that also through facial recognition software in real time?
So I did try to track this down, and it was, I believe, a license plate reader that once they wanted to arrest him, they know the car he's driving. There's license plate cameras everywhere. Yeah.
Man, okay. So he was identified via AI, and the LPRs are, I mean, I'm going to call that a degree of AI as well, because they're passive. They're out there constantly sniffing and looking for, and I don't know if a lot of people recognize this as well. I have a limited understanding of this, and this is through talking with friends of mine who work in law enforcement. LPRs, you could be driving along. An officer could have no suspicion whatsoever of vehicles passing in traffic in another direction. And if that LPR sniffs a license plate and it hits to some type of a warrant or actionable item, they get alerted in almost real time. And again, this is this conversation of, where does the line in privacy exist? I don't have a great answer for it, because I do want criminals to be dealt with as criminals, but also, where do we put a stop to our personal privacy becoming primary over the government or government agencies being able to look deeply, deeply into your life, whether you want them to or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a hard balance to strike, because the technology is getting so ubiquitous and so powerful that we could live in this panopticon where it's always watching, and you do something wrong and you're very quickly caught, if everything works perfectly. But do we want to live in that world where we are so closely observed, where the people that control those technologies have so much power over you? Do we trust those systems not to make mistakes and not to kind of suffocate our civil liberties along the way? And those are the big questions we're grappling with right now as these technologies are getting so powerful.
This episode of Change Agents is brought to you by MTNTOUGH. I've done a few things in my life, not all of them physical, but there is one thing that I believe. When I have been successful, it has largely been because of the physical capacity and capability I had at the time. The brain is what solves the problems, but it's only as good as the chassis that it is built upon. And that is what I think the value of strength and conditioning, or conditioning in general, is for everybody, regardless of what it is that you do. If you want the muscles, or the muscle, I should say, between your ears to work at peak performance, you need to focus on everything from the neck down as well. The cool thing about MTNTOUGH, or some of the cool things I should say about MTNTOUGH, is you can do it anywhere, right? You can, if you have an internet connection, if you have a device that connects to the internet, you can find the workouts that are suited for you. And it doesn't matter what level of conditioning you're starting, they have a program that works for you. Then there's also a community of people that can help hold you accountable, that you can interface with, ask questions, and join. And I mean, we all know that doing something arduous is better when you're sharing that suffering. Camaraderie, right? It's a combination of pain and laughter. That's my description of it. And some of these workouts hurt. That's okay. The benefit from that is worth it. If you have a community to share it with, it's going to keep you on board that much longer. So MTNTOUGH is offering Change Agents listeners an incredible offer, 40% off on the all-new MTNTOUGH Plus annual subscription with the code CHANGEAGENTS. The way that I'm looking at that, it's one word in all uppercase. Go to MTN, that is Mike, Tango, November, Tough, regular spelling.com, and enter the code CHANGEAGENTS to receive 40% off, a savings of about $100 on your MTNTOUGH Plus annual subscription. That's MTNTOUGH.com, and enter the code CHANGEAGENTS to save 40%. That's less than 50 cents per day for the best-in-class physical and mental training available to you. There were some dark moments. Holy shit.
We ought to probably have dinner sometime.
They were ghosts.
Okay, this guy's serious.
I mean, that's unheard of, right? Yeah. Tens of thousands of children digging cobalt out of the ground.
You just sensed that it was out there.
It's like they'd been hit by a nuclear bomb.
We're not framing history correctly.
I want adaptability and versatility.
Don't draft Wolf on your fantasy team. He's not going to get the ball this year.
This is going to matter one day.
This is how I pulled myself out.
That's when my eyes were opened.
This is a whole new wildlife enemy, man. This is crazy. Who are these guys?
Us in our own country don't even have the same gratitude towards it.
And he does the right thing because he closes the distance.
We're all programmed in this world to push ourselves even farther.
I don't have to make something important, but what I have to try to do is make something you'll never forget.
How do the founders of Clearview AI answer questions about privacy concerns? What's their stance on it?
Yeah, it was I mean, I've talked to Juan Tontat, the founder, a lot over the years, and I would say he didn't have great answers in the beginning. But over time, he's gotten more thoughtful about it, and he says, I think this is the best possible use case for facial recognition technology. The way he put it in one of our early interviews was, instead of pedophiles having access to it to, for example, search the face of a child on the playground to figure out who they are, where they live, the police are using it to catch pedophiles. And that, like if facial recognition exists, this is the best possible use case, using it to solve crimes. One of the things that I've heard from a lot of police is that they do only want to use it retroactively, like after a crime has been committed. And there's a lot of resistance in the US to having, for example, facial recognition running on all the cameras all the time, where you could find people in real time. That seems to, at this point, make us pretty uncomfortable in the US to think of the government having that power.
I am not so sure the government doesn't already have that power. Whether outsourcing it to Clearview AI or they're just doing it directly. How does Clearview know that pedophiles aren't using it in that way? I went to their website just briefly before we got online, and there is certainly a civilian usage for this and a portal for civilians to gain access to this tool. How do they know that it's not being used by people like that?
Is it? Is there? That's new. If that's the case, I'm looking at their website now.
Yeah.
I mean, Clearview, according to the settlement they reached with the ACLU, they are only supposed to be selling it to police entities in the US. They are starting to sell their product in South America. But yeah, I mean, in the US, they're not selling it. But the thing is, what Clearview did was possible because of how accessible this technology is now. I asked Juan Tontat, I was like, okay, you were doing Facebook quizzes called Would You Rather and iPhone games and an app called Trump Hair. How did you go from doing that to creating this kind of world-shaking facial recognition technology? And I was like, can you walk me through the steps? And he said, I went on to Twitter and I followed machine learning experts. I went on to GitHub, which is like a code sharing site, and I searched for facial recognition. And I kind of started laughing at him and he started laughing. He said, yeah, I know. It sounds like I Googled flying car and then I built one. But this is kind of something that's happened within the space of artificial intelligence, that a lot of the people working on it share what they create. In the book, I say it's as if the person who came up with the recipe for Coca-Cola shared it with the whole world. They're doing this kind of knowledge sharing that allowed him to build this incredible app without being a specialist in biometric technology. And other companies are doing it too. So, civilians aren't supposed to be using Clearview AI, but there are other sites that are just like Clearview that anyone can use. And, there's one big one that they don't scrape social media, but they scrape kind of the public internet. And I usually do a demo of it when I talk about the book to help people kind of just see this for themselves, how it works. And it works really, really well, even when people have a COVID mask on or they have sunglasses or a hat. I mean, this technology is out there. We don't have controls in place right now for it.
I want to be clear. I could have been misreading their website because the technical description for me is that of being a moron. So I might have been misread. And again, I didn't attempt to go any further than looking at their website. I was just curious what you see when you go to that site.
The one thing they do sell to non-law enforcement is the algorithm. So like if you have your own database of photos and you want to use their algorithm, let's say you have like an apartment building and you want to only let people who live there kind of like go in without having to interact with the security guard, you could put your own kind of database of photos into their system and use their algorithm. But that database they have, and their database is huge. Last I heard, they had 40 billion photos, which is many more photos than people who exist on the planet. So, lots of photos of individuals that they only sell to law enforcement.
Okay, so they have two separate products. I suppose that makes sense.
Yeah.
30 to 50 billion photos. Let's assume half the population of Earth probably has no access or interest or is not of age for social media. So we'll call it 4 billion total people. And the reality is it's probably even less than that. I mean, that actually, though, might just be like 7 people I know in life, because I swear all I see all day long are picture. They might be the 6 people I know might be the lion's share of that 40 or 50 billion. But my God, what a database. And how do you unwind that? Let's say you all of a sudden shift your profile to private. You can't go back in time, or can you in any way, shape, or form remove yourself or opt out of this database that the civilian company has now created?
So it depends again on where you live. There's some states that have these state privacy laws now that say that you have the right to go to a company and ask them what information they have on you, and you can ask them to delete it. So I don't know where you're based. Where do you live?
Montana.
In Montana. I don't think Montana has one of these laws. I live in New York. New York does not have one of these laws. But if you, for example, live in California, you can go to Clearview AI, say, here's a picture of me. Here's my ID proving that's me. I want to know what photos you have of me. And they will send you a report. And if you don't like it, you can say, delete me from your database. So some people in the US have that right, but not all of us, because again, we don't have like a strong federal privacy law.
I'm going to go again back to, though, who is the watchdog to make sure that that organization actually, this is my understanding of technology, grabs the little folder with your name on it and pulls it to the garbage can icon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be, California now has a state privacy regulator, so they could look into this. And the Federal Trade Commission is kind of the de facto privacy regulator in the United States. Their mandate is to protect consumers against unfair and deceptive business practices. So if Clearview tells everybody, hey, we'll delete your photos, and then they don't, the FTC could probably go after them. But the FTC is a relatively tiny agency, and there's a lot of unfair and deceptive business practices around the country.
In 40 to 50 billion images, that's real tough to sort through, especially if the company that is holding that just absolute treasure trove of valuable information is not going to be helpful in helping you parse through that information.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I've heard from kind of technically minded people is Clearview actually deleting the images, or are they just taking your face and saying, don't surface results for it like they do? Or do they keep all the photos in a database and they just don't
because those
return yours?
Yeah, those are not equal in any way, shape, or form. One, they still have all that information. The other one is, we actually got rid of it and no longer can access it. One is still, I think, very powerful and valuable. The other one removes that power and value from them. Again, I would love to know, and you'd have to have a technical understanding of the systems and an ability to double check this. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the FTC may not be staffed and equipped to necessarily handle that issue.
Right. I think you're probably right.
Has there been any communication or efforts? I mean, I think, we can't go back in time. You can't put the horse in the cart back in the barn. So likely this type of technology is going to exist going forward. It is going to be refined going forward. Have there been efforts? Has there been communication around regulating this type at a national level? And if so, how is that being received?
I hear, I've been covering privacy for a long time, and I often hear lawmakers talking about we should do something about this at the federal level. And it is so rare to see something happen. At the federal level, most often what I hear people talking about is how do we regulate government use? What should we allow police to do? Should they have access to these huge databases of photos scraped from all over the internet, where basically anytime they do a search, we're all in the lineup. Like, I have a lot of photos in Clearview AI, and when the police in New Orleans are using Clearview AI to try to identify this suspect who was stealing purses, they're searching my face along with almost 100% yours, and like a lot of the people that are listening to podcasts right now. So is that an unreasonable search is one of the questions. Does that violate the Fourth Amendment to put us all in the lineup for every crime? So that's, I think, one of the questions. And there's another question about, like, should they just be able to do this like every time a crime is committed? Should it be only for serious crimes? Should they have to get a warrant to do a facial recognition search? Most of the questions are, how do we want the government using this technology? And one of the things I've heard from kind of civil liberties activists is that this is a way of working around the Fourth Amendment. Like, if the government created this database, if they went and scraped the entire web and they created a facial recognition app, we would probably have grounds to say that, yeah, that violates the Fourth Amendment. That's an unreasonable search. That's an unreasonable seizure of personal information. But it gets complicated when it's a private company that does that, and then the government's just buying access to that search. So yeah, and that's something that's kind of happening generally.
It's just a different path to the same end state. And again, it's in watching what we were able to do from an electronic perspective a decade and a half ago, actually 2 decades ago, where we didn't even have faces. It was numbers, but you can associate individuals with groups, where they are, who they're talking to, maybe not even understanding what they're saying, but you can start to connect the dots. If they have all of this information, there is absolutely a world where, let's say that a crime is committed and they're using facial recognition software and they can identify somebody, they can cascade that downstream. Oh, who are their known acquaintances? Where do they like to hang out? What kind of groups are they associated with? Let's start looking into these groups. And before you know it, the spotlight is no longer even on the person that they were originally looking at. They're down this rabbit hole that they never would have been pointed at unless that technology existed and gave them this volume of information. And that scares the shit out of me. That starts getting towards like the Minority Report situation.
And that is how it works. For the book, I went down to Miami. I got to hang out in their real-time crime center and kind of see all the different technologies they're using. The license plate readers, cameras everywhere. They had the Snap Map up, which I thought was funny because that's publicly accessible. Anybody can use it. And they said, sometimes we don't need cameras. Like, people are cameras because everyone's broadcasting all the time. But yeah, I watched them do this Clearview search, and it's funny, like, when you're talking about theoretically, it all sounds perfect. But when you get into on-the-ground situations, like at one point I saw surveillance footage. It happened right in front of a camera in a grocery store parking lot that these 2 guys got mugged, and the getaway car goes by on the camera, but the footage was too grainy. You couldn't search the faces. You couldn't even identify the license plate. Like, it didn't work as well as you would think it would work. But I did see an officer do this other search where he's like, okay, we're looking for this guy. He looks for the photos. There's a photo of him with a woman. Now we're looking up the woman. And it's like you can jump from face to face to face. And so, yeah, it can be really useful for police, but that can get uncomfortable pretty quickly. It's as if you're in a picture with somebody and now you're implicated if they ever do anything wrong.
How fast is this technology evolving? So you said you started taking a look at this in 2019, was it?
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen in the 5 years? Because I feel like if it's anything, obviously, Chat GPT is not necessarily an AI, right? It's a large language model. But I think it's a good representation of how fast technology that is not exactly the same, but similar. The first versions in comparison to the efficacy of the current versions are unbelievable. And they are making generational jumps. First, it was slower, and now it's like every other time I'm logging on, there's another update, and it's capable of doing more. And now it's got the ability to search the internet, whereas before it was being fed data points that were 2 years old. I can only imagine that this is happening with this type of technology as well.
Yeah, I mean, one big thing is that when I first learned of Clearview AI, they had 3 billion photos, and now they have 40 billion photos. So that database is growing all of the time. a lot of people told me like facial recognition, it's part of why I wrote the book about it. It's been through the full cycle. Like it works incredibly well now. It is very mature, as opposed to some of the other AI technologies like generative AI, where it does feel like we're still in the early days. It still makes a lot of mistakes. It hallucinates.
Well, at all.
Yeah. But Juan Tontat, he hasn't talked to me since the book came out. I don't think he loved the book. But as the book was ending, he was telling me about the other things that the company was working on. And he said, I want to not just identify faces. I want to be able to identify the backgrounds of photos so that we can tell where in the world this photo was taken, which could be a very powerful tool to have. What I've seen is just a proliferation where this facial recognition technology is more available. There was this person on TikTok, for example, that anytime a TikTok went super viral and there was a person in it of interest, this person would access one of these publicly available facial recognition search sites and find out who the person was. I remember there's this one video in New York City and Brooklyn during the Canadian wildfires where Brooklyn had turned orange, like something out of Blade Runner.
Smoke-Ageddon pictures.
The Smoke-Ageddon picture. And so this was just like a TikTok that was kind of surveying the scene. And this man walks by who was very attractive, and he became like hot Brooklyn dad. And the video went viral. It's just so silly, like hot Brooklyn dad. And so this TikTok account that specialized in identifying people found out who this guy was, and then figured out his family ties, and then found his son's Instagram account. And then did this video that was like, if you want to be married to hot Brooklyn dad one day, go friend his son on Instagram. And it was just so creepy. I mean, it's like fun and silly, but you can see how this information can be weaponized and used in weird ways. And I don't know, once it's in our hands, there'll probably be like great ways we use it, but there's going to be these weird, uncomfortable ways. And so I'm already seeing it kind of start to spread out of the hands of government actors and corporate actors and into just what we decide to do with it.
Well, especially, and again, to keep it directly on Clearview AI, if they have a government product, but hey, you know what, you're not the government, but we'll give you the algorithm, right? And so here, we're not going to cook the meal for you, chef. We'll go to the grocery store though and bag it up for you and put it on your kitchen table, and you're responsible for putting the pieces together. You can still get to that end state. And if you don't know how to do it, I'm pretty sure there's a pile of money somewhere that is big enough that would get somebody else to take that algorithm. And it can get out of control incredibly quickly. It scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, there is this one. I mean, there's so many. I have so many stories, but again, that's the Madison Square Garden model, right? They did their own database of lawyer photos. And so you can just imagine a company or a person, who are they looking for? Who do they want to monitor? Who do they want to know when they walk through the door? This does give them the power. I mean, just the thing I think about is this world in which this is on everybody's phone. Every business is scanning your face as you walk in. Every government has facial recognition algorithms running on all the cameras, so that you're just kind of like low-key tracked all the time. And you can never escape yourself. And kind of like everything that's noble about you from the internet will be attached to your face. And it would just totally change how we interact in society. And it would bring that kind of discomfort we have of being online, where you have to, you have to think really hard about something before you put it on the public internet, before you write a tweet, before you post.
That might be a net positive.
You think so? I mean, I've heard that from Clearview AI's supporters. They say it'll make the world more accountable.
I'm not supporting Clearview AI. I'm saying that maybe if people thought a little bit more about what they put on the internet, that would have a net positive change. I don't from Clearview AI, I just would like people to pull their heads out of their asses a little bit.
But I think facial recognition would mean you have to be that way in the real world too. You'd have to think about everything you do could come back to haunt you. Yeah, I was getting on a flight the other day, and these two guys got in a huge argument, like at the front of the line as like business class was boarding, and they're screaming at each other, and it was so strange. We were on a flight to Pittsburgh, and everyone said, "Oh, that's Pittsburgh." But when we got on the plane, one guy's in first class, one guy's in economy, and the guy in first class is still mad. He's standing up as I walk by, and saying to the other guy, "You're an economy," And halfway through the flight, the guy from first class walks back and takes a photo of the guy in economy. And I'm there on my way to talk about my book about facial recognition. And I just know, wow, that guy can take that photo. He can find out who the other guy is. This kind of glancing moment of rage could be something that continues, that has this long life. And I think that is what could happen in our world. That's just every little thing you do, it could be attached to you forever. And I don't know. That just scares me. I don't think I want to live in that world.
I don't either. And so that begs the million-dollar question, and maybe it's a good way to work our way out of the conversation. But if we want to take power away from system and tools like this, what do we do? Or is it past the point where we can do anything?
I do not think it's past the point. I'm not a privacy nihilist. I think that we need to make the choice of the world that we want to live in, and we shouldn't just let what's technically possible determine what the world looks like. And I have faith that this can happen because it's happened in the past. There was this time in American history where, I'm talking 1950s, 1960s, there's all these tiny listening devices that are being developed by industry, like little tiny bugs, eavesdropping equipment for phone lines. And the nation kind of freaked out that they were going to lose their collective privacy. They call it the electronic listening invasion. And, you had Richard Nixon in the White House recording every conversation that happened. You had private detectives, tapping people's home lines to collect evidence of infidelity. Corporations were tapping their competitors in a form of corporate espionage. And yeah, people worried they would never be able to have a private conversation again, that everything you said would be recorded. And so lawmakers stepped in and they made that illegal, that you can't secretly record people without their consent, that you can't tap people's phone lines. And it's the reason why the surveillance cameras that, dot the urban landscape are only recording our images and not sound, because we decided that that was important. And so I think we're at that moment again where we need to decide, what do we want the world to look like? What kind of privacy do we want to have? And then we need to enshrine that in the law and force companies to kind of honor what we want the world to look like.
Where would you point somebody who is really curious about their digital footprint? How could they find out? I mean, because the first step towards taking action is going to be educating yourself about the situation you're in. What have been some tools that you have found to be effective for people to determine exactly what kind of footprint they have?
Yeah, I mean, with facial recognition technology specifically, if you're so lucky to live in a state that has a strong privacy law, like California, Connecticut, Colorado, there's a few others, go to Clearview AI's website and go to their privacy section and request your report and see what images are out there, see what your footprint is. If you're not so lucky to live in those places, you can go to a site called PIMEYES, PIMEYES, and you could submit your face and kind of get a sense of some of the photos that are out there. And I do think that's a good place to start. And with PIMEYES, you can say, if there are results you don't like, you can ask them to remove them from their system so that they don't surface for other people. Yeah, good place to start. There's so many other things that people can do. But I think right now, for people who are listening to this, they're probably wondering, gosh, where does my face appear on the internet? And that's a way you can find out.
More places than they would likely want it to is the answer. Is the short answer to that long, long question of what can be done. What would you like to leave the listeners with? I'll let you have the closing words as we get to the end of our time.
Oh my gosh, just think about making your footprint on the internet as private as possible. Unless there's some benefit that you gain from having a public Instagram account or having a public Facebook page, make it private, because there are lots of companies out there right now, and not just Clearview AI, that are kind of scraping anything that's public on the internet. And, why give them access to it? Just make it available to your friends and your family. That would be my major advice. Go private.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to go smash my cell phone and all my laptops. No, I really appreciate it. These conversations are hard to have sometimes because it just gets your mind going and you can't shut it off. I can catastrophize this, but I could also look in the direction of all the positive impact it could have. But either way I go with that, I can't shut my brain off. And then,
I'll walk a few blocks to the coffee shop where there's security cameras, and the whole time I'll be looking, oh, there's a bank over there. I wonder if I'm on their imagery, or there's a, traffic camera over there. It's easy to get paranoid.
Yeah, it is. And it's not paranoia when it's true. And so, yeah, I mean, I do have faith that we'll choose the world that we want to live in. And I hope that we do that, because I do think privacy is important, and we get to decide, the technology shouldn't get to decide for us.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope it left you with some thoughts, some questions, perhaps. What kind of presence do you want to have online? Is it actually too late for you, depending on who you are and how you live your life, to even change the presence that you have? Or are you like me? You are constantly now being used in a lineup without your knowledge, permission, or ability to stop it. If you want to learn more about Kashmir Hill's book, please check it out. It's called Your Face Belongs to Us. And thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Montana Knife Company. We're going to be back next week with an all-new episode.